There is a road nobody has ever needed directions to find. Nobody has stood at a crossroads confused about which way leads there, wondering if they took a wrong turn. It's the road you end up on by doing nothing at all. No map, no decision required. You just keep moving, and it finds you. Scripture has language for that kind of openness, and it shows up in a few places you might not expect. In the book of Genesis, a man finally stops fighting for the ground under his feet and names the place where the fighting ends. He'd dug well after well, and Philistine herdsmen had claimed each one before he could even settle in. By the third well, nobody showed up to argue. In the Psalms, a king describes being pulled out of an enemy's grip and set down somewhere with room to breathe. After years of running from a rival who wanted him dead, both times, the same idea appears, being led into a broad place. Space to move, room to exist, without anything closing in on you. In both cases, that's God's own language for rescue, for relief, for blessing. Then Jesus takes that same idea, spaciousness, room to move freely, and uses it to describe the road that leads to destruction. Most people hear the wide road and picture something obviously reckless, a life of scandal and defiance. That's not quite what the text is warning about. It's warning about ease itself. A road that never once makes you choose anything. A road that never corrects you, never pushes back, never asks you to become anything. Once you see what this word is doing here, uneasy, obstacle, free choice won't look neutral to you again. Before we go further, if you've got a second, drop where you're watching from in the comments. It's a small thing, but it's a good reminder of how far a road like this one has already reached, in one form or another, into just about every life watching right now. Now, let's get into it. Picture the same hillside above the Sea of Galilee that so many of Jesus's most familiar words came from. A crowd sitting on the grass, fishermen and farmers mostly, a handful of religious officials standing at the edges, taking notes. Jesus has been teaching for a while by this point, working through anger, money, worry, judgment, prayer, raising the bar on what real righteousness looks like. And right near the end of everything he's just said, before he closes with a warning about houses built on rock and houses built on sand, he draws one final picture. Two gates, two roads. He doesn't spend most of his breath on the narrow one. He gives real weight to the road that's easy to miss, precisely because nobody thinks they're on it. The road so many people are already walking without ever noticing they made a choice. He tells the crowd plainly that the gate leading to destruction is wide, and the road behind it is roomy. Plenty of space to spread out, nothing narrowing it down, nothing hemming it in. Think about how that must have landed on that hillside. Most of these listeners had spent their whole lives inside a religious system that felt like a maze of fine print. Rule, stacked on rule. Exception, stacked on exception. A gate, described as wide, would have sounded like relief. Finally, something without 100 conditions attached. That's the trap hiding inside the description. The word was never meant to comfort anyone. It described how a road can feel like freedom, while being the one place nothing in your life is ever asked to change. Let's slow down on that word, roomy, because in the Greek behind Matthew's Gospel, it isn't an ordinary word for wide. It's eurichoros, a compound built from euris, meaning wide, fused with koros, meaning open country, empty space, room to expand. Here's something almost nobody points out. This is the only place this word shows up anywhere in the New Testament. Jesus reaches for it once, for this teaching, and never again. Picture what the word is really describing. Not a large doorway, wide open country, no fences, nothing to keep you from doing whatever you already wanted to do. Which also quietly means there's nothing there to correct you either. You can't drift off a road with no edges. Wherever you're already standing, the road has already taken you in. Here's something worth knowing about the roads. Jesus' listeners actually walked. Decades later, the Roman Empire would pave broad, engineered highways. Through this region, smooth stone, careful drainage, milestones counting out the miles. That hadn't happened yet. Actually, let me back up, because it's easy to get this backwards. It's tempting to picture Jesus pointing at some grand imperial road when he says wide. He wasn't. During his own lifetime, across Galilee and Judea, there were no major paved highways at all. The first-century Jewish historian Flavius Josephus, who fought against the Romans and later served under them, left behind a detailed account of their military road building decades after this sermon was preached. But before any of that, the roads regular people used were dirt tracks, worn wide, not by any engineer's plan, but by the sheer weight of traffic. Every caravan, every family heading toward market, every crowd, moving the same direction, wore that path a little wider than the day before. Nobody designed the wide road on purpose. The crowd did. One set of footsteps at a time. It got wide because everyone was already using it. Merchants moving goods between towns took the same route their fathers had taken. Because it was known, safe, already worn smooth by everyone who'd gone before. On market days, those tracks would have been thick with people, all heading the same way, trusting the crowd around them more than any map. Nobody stopped to ask where the road actually led. Everyone else was already on it. And that was reason enough. That's basically the shape of most of our lives, isn't it? Nobody sits down and formally decides to drift. Nobody wakes up and announces they've chosen to stop growing. It happens the way a path gets worn down, one easy choice at a time, small enough to barely notice, until the groove is too deep to see over the edges of. The show that auto plays into the next one without you touching anything. The plan nobody had to make, because everyone around you had already made it first. A whole year that passed without one decision in it, that cost you something real. That isn't freedom. It's a road with no walls, which means nothing in it was ever asking you to turn. And to be fair, this isn't only a warning about the obviously sinful road. If your mind jumped straight to something scandalous, something dramatic, you might be letting yourself off the hook a little too easily. The wide road doesn't need scandal to do its work. It only needs your attention set to autopilot. Quick word before we keep going, because this next part matters. The narrow gate Jesus describes, right alongside this one, is costly hard, deliberate, chosen against real resistance. The wide gate is the opposite kind of danger, not costly, just consequence, free feeling. And we haven't even gotten to the reason that makes it more dangerous, not less. Here's the surface level answer, and it's a true one on its own. A road that never asks anything of you, never makes anything of you either. Character isn't handed out at birth, fully formed. It's built the way muscle is built under resistance, under load, under 100 small decisions that could have gone the easy way and didn't. The wide road quietly removes every one of those decisions before you ever have to face them. No resistance, no growth. That's the plain, human level. Reason an easy road ends in ruin. It was never going anywhere, because nothing on it ever required you to move. But that's not the only reason this road is dangerous. There's still a piece of this. We haven't touched a place where this same word for wide shows up again. Somewhere you wouldn't expect it. If you've ever looked back over a stretch of your own life and thought, I don't even remember choosing any of this. It just happened. That feeling is what this word is describing. Not a moment of open rebellion, an absence of resistance so complete, you never noticed the current carrying you. Now here's where the Greek gets even more specific, and it's worth slowing down for. The word translated wide for the gate itself, back in Matthew 7:13, is plateia. Matthew had a plain word sitting right there, if all he meant was an unremarkable road. Hodos, the everyday word for a path, used constantly throughout the Gospels, for perfectly normal journeys. He didn't reach for that word here. He reached for plateia, which in everyday Greek usage wasn't really functioning as an adjective at all. It was a noun in its own right. It meant a town square, a public plaza, the wide, open gathering place, at the center of an ancient city. Oh, that changes the picture. Jesus isn't simply describing a gate that happens to be wide. He's describing a gate that opens straight into the town square itself, the busiest, most public stretch of ground in the whole city. No privacy there. No individual decision required to walk through it, just the current of everyone else already moving through it alongside you. That same route, by the way, gives English a small cluster of words, plaza, plus, and in German, Platz, a wide open public gathering space, still carrying roughly the same shape more than 2,000 years later. This isn't a new idea inside Scripture, either. It's the oldest fork in the road there is. Moses laid the same choice out plainly, standing on the edge of the promised land, setting life and death, blessing and curse, in front of a whole waiting nation, telling them to choose life. The very first psalm draws the identical line, one path rooted like a tree beside flowing water, the other blown away like chaff, nothing underneath it to hold on to. Proverbs puts it even more bluntly, warning that there's a way that feels right to a person, and its end is death. Notice what those three passages share. None of them describe the wrong road as obviously wrong. Moses doesn't warn Israel about an enemy waiting at the border with a sword. The psalm doesn't call the wicked monstrous. Proverbs goes out of its way to say, the road only feels right, which is a very different claim than saying it feels evil. All of these older warnings are pointed at the same danger Jesus describes centuries later. A road that looks perfectly reasonable, right up until it isn't. He's not inventing a brand new warning on that hillside. He's stepping into a conversation Scripture had been having with itself for 1,000 years before he opened his mouth. There's a companion teaching a lot of people ask about, because on its own, it can sound even harsher. Many are called, but few are chosen. That line comes from a different parable. Entirely, a king throwing a wedding banquet, but underneath it, It's the same fork in the road, wearing different clothes. Being called was never the hard part. Anyone standing near the plaza hears the invitation eventually. The real question was always whether you'd step through the door, or just keep moving with the crowd, because the crowd was already moving and staying inside it was easier. Picture what a first-century plaza actually looked like. No admission charged. No gate fee. Nobody checking who you were before letting you pass. Merchants selling their goods. Travelers passing through on their way somewhere else. Children weaving between the stalls. Beggars and soldiers and priests, all sharing the same ground at the same time. By design, it was the one place in the whole city where you never had to explain yourself to anyone. You could disappear into it completely. That's the gate, Jesus says, is wide. That's not far off from what a scrolling feed actually is. If you think about it honestly. An endless public square you can wander into and quietly vanish inside, where nobody asks your name, and nothing in it ever asks you to stop. So the picture keeps sharpening the longer we sit with it. It was never merely a road. It's a road that spills straight into the town square, and the square doesn't care who walks through it, because it was built from the ground up to hold everyone at once, without distinction. And here's where the open loop from earlier finally pays off. That word, plateia, the wide gate, the town square, isn't a one-time word in the New Testament. It shows up again, more than once. In Luke chapter 10, Jesus sends his followers ahead of him into surrounding towns. He tells them that if a town refuses to welcome them, they're to walk out into its plateia, its wide street, and shake the dust off their feet. There is a testimony against it, and in Luke chapter 14, inside one of Jesus' own parables, a man throws a great banquet. His invited guests all make excuses and refuse to come. The furious master doesn't cancel the celebration. He turns to his servant and sends him out immediately into the town's crowded streets, to gather in whoever can be found there. The poor, the overlooked, anyone. The rest of the guest list never bothered to notice. That servant is sent into that same word, plateia, the wide, public, everybody's, business street, not to condemn the people standing in it, to go and find them there, and pull them in. So here's the deeper layer sitting underneath the surface answer from earlier. Yes, the wide road produces nothing, because it demands nothing. That's still true. But the wide road was never outside God's reach either. It's specifically where he sends someone looking. The ease that makes the road wide isn't a wall keeping grace out. It's the ground grace was sent to cover. There's one more place. This word turns up, worth sitting with for a moment, because it shows this kind of space can hold two very different endings. In Revelation, the same word plateia describes the street of a great city where two witnesses are left exposed after their deaths. Samaverd, same kind of space, but there, it isn't a rescue scene. Its rejection carried all the way to its end. The plaza itself doesn't decide anything on its own, it's just ground. What happens to a person standing in it depends on whether they're found there or left there. If you've ever caught yourself defending a habit by saying everyone does it, or explaining away a decision because it was simply easier, that's worth pausing on. Easier isn't a moral argument. It's never once been proof that something is safe. It's only proof that it required nothing of you, and the wide road was never built to require anything of anyone. A person who never once had to choose their own faith, because it was just the air they grew up breathing. A calendar that filled itself, without one decision in it that ever cost something real. A whole life that drifted for years. Not because anyone was pushing it that way, but because nothing inside it ever pushed back. That's the wide road. Not usually a dramatic wrong turn, taken in a single moment. More often, the total absence of ever turning at all. For a sense of scale, archaeologists have measured what an ordinary paved street in Jerusalem looked like. Once Roman engineering finally arrived roughly 18 feet across the city's grand showcase street. The Cardo Maximus ran closer to 70 feet wide, room enough for crowds, carts, and commerce to move freely, side by side, with space left over. That's the physical shape. Roomy takes. Enough room that you'd never have to walk close to anyone else. Never have to look anyone in the eye. Never have to pick a lane and commit to it. So picture the whole thing together, one more time, and start to finish. A road worn wide, not by careful design, but by generation after generation of feet, all taking the easiest line. That road spills straight into a town square, built to swallow up anyone who wanders in without a name attached. And into that same square platea, the very word Jesus used for the wide gate itself, he sends someone, on purpose, to go find the overlooked and bring them home. Okay, let's bring this all the way back around. If your own life right now feels wide, ask yourself something honestly. Has anything in it genuinely asked you to choose in a long while? Do the days keep moving on their own momentum? So smoothly, you can't quite remember the last decision that cost you something real. If so, that ease isn't proof you're safe. It's almost word for word. The description of the road. Jesus warned everyone about that day on the hillside. But hear the rest of it too. Because it's just as true. The same road wide enough to swallow you whole is also, provably, the exact street where he already sent someone out looking for you. You don't have to fight your own way out of the crowd before you can be found in it. You only have to stop assuming the crowd is where you're required to stay. The narrow gate isn't waiting somewhere far off, reserved for people who've already gotten their lives sorted out. It opens right off this same wide street, right where you happen to be standing. The moment you're willing to step out of the current and choose. That choosing rarely looks dramatic from the outside. It looks like turning off the show instead of letting the next one start on its own. It looks like naming, out loud, the one habit you've been excusing, because everyone else seems to be carrying it too. It looks like a decision on an ordinary Tuesday, that nobody else will ever know, cost you anything. Except you, and the God, who was already watching that street for you to slow down. None of it requires you to leave the crowd behind in some dramatic public break. It only requires you to stop moving just because everyone around you is still moving. Not because you weren't clever enough to find the narrow way on your own. Not because the invitation quietly ran out before it reached you. Not because grace only had room in it for a select few. The very word used for a servant being sent to compel a whole town's forgotten people into a wedding banquet is not, in any sense, the language of a short guest list. The wide street outside is still there tonight. Still crowded. Still easy. Still asking nothing of anyone, walking through it. But the door opening off, it swings both ways. And there's someone standing in that same wide, ordinary, overlooked street tonight, still doing exactly what he did in that parable. Still going out into the platea, Still looking for the ones the crowd already walked past. Houston's gone quiet tonight. And if you're winding down with this too, wherever you happen to be watching from, may you find the courage to actually stop and choose. Right there, in the middle of the wide, easy street you're already standing on. If this changed how you read wide, is the gate? Leave a comment. Even one word helps more than you'd think. And the narrow gate deserves its own hour of your attention too. What waits on the other side of the pressing and the cost? The two were always meant to be read together. One road, answering the other. God bless you.